Hello? Okay. A very distinguished panel of guests who are going to talk with us about energy and climate change. As far as I'm concerned, the most important subject in the world right now. And it is being live streamed, if you want to tell your friends about it, at +SocialGood.org. After 45 minutes, I'm going to do one round. I hope to get through 2 rounds of questions, okay? So 1 round with each person here, and then another round, and then we're going to take questions from the audience and from Twitter, and Marielle, who's sitting over there, is going to give us some questions. And then afterwards, there's a reception for everyone downstairs, okay? So here on the panel today, we have a very distinguished panel. We have Mr. José Penido, who is well known to anybody in Brazil who works in sustainability. He is the chairman of the board of directors of Fibria Cellulose, and he is has had a very active business career with projects focused on sustainability. Next to him, we have Dr. Gro Brundtland, whom practically invented sustainability. It's an enormous honor to have you here, Dr. Brundtland. Thank you very much for coming. Next to her, Tasso Azevedo, my good friend, who is the coordinator, as many things, the coordinator at SIG, which calculates emissions of, I'm trying to translate here, of greenhouse gases. And when people are too slow about, whole countries are too slow about calculating their greenhouse gas emissions, he does it for them. Next to him, we have Beatriz Kiss, who is an environmental engineer and climate change specialist at the Center for Sustainable Studies at Getúlio Vargas University. Next to her, Senator Timothy E. Worth, who was former U.S. Senator and Vice Chairman of the UN Foundation, which is organizing this event together with SocialGood. And next to him, we have Haroldo Machado, who is General Supervisor of the Environment and Development Unit of the UNDP Brazil. Okay, I'm going to start out with Dr. Brundtland and ask her to tell us when she first became concerned about climate change and how things how the discussion has evolved from that time to today.
As I was asked by the Secretary General of the United Nations to create and chair a new international commission dealing with environmental issues, I made clear that if we are to study environment, we have to also study the issues that are linked to development, because there is no way to take care of the environment without taking seriously the pattern of development. So now, during the time that we were studying, I created and we called it, this was 1984. Yeah. So in 1984, it's more than 30 years ago now, I was asked to do this. And we had one commissioner from this state, Paulo Neto. So I picked one from Brazil, but picked the commission of 23 members from across the world, most of them coming from the developing world, because I insisted there is no solution to these problems unless we look globally at them. And then you cannot have only Europeans or Americans on a commission. So that's when we started. Then the first place we were was in Sao Paulo as a commission, when we traveled together to study the issues at the country level and by talking with people who had direct experience from environmental and other social concerns. So we were in Sao Paulo and had public hearings, which was new. The government of Sao Paulo at that time first refused. They had no tradition of having open, critical discussions. But we insisted, and they gave in because otherwise we had not come. Now, during the 3 years of our discussions and our traveling around the world, opening experts across many different areas, including energy, we came to the conclusion that we have to warn against global warming and the risk of climate change. It was one of our many recommendations and one of the points in our, this was when we delivered the report was 87. It was called Our Common Future. It was delivered or launched in London in April of 87. But already in 85 or so, we knew that the risk of global warming was real, and we were addressing these issues in the report. Now, then you said, what happened since then? Well, we are here nearly 30 years later, and now basically nobody with any degree of education across the world is in any doubt that climate change is real. And if they are in doubt, they haven't studied enough and they have not put their finger in the ground and listened to science. But, you know, basically the awareness across the world is established now a long time ago, or many years ago. So sometimes people say, but nothing happened in 30 years. No, it's not true. You, who are young people here, some of you, many of you, were not even born when that report came. But you have grown up learning, at least from your primary school years, that something is dangerously changing, and how do we address it? So that is what also helps the world now be more ready to take the actions that we need.
Thank you very much. I'd like to jump to Senator Worth, please. And so Dr. Brundtland has said that now we've had a new awareness in 30 years. Everyone has become aware of that. But we realize that in the United States, I'd like to ask you specifically, since you have so much experience in the United States government, it's been a tough sell, climate change, in many different circles. How do you see the question today? And do you think the U.S. position has evolved?
Thank you, and thank you all very much for coming. Let me first of all make a comment on our moderator. Matthew Schertz was once a student at Stanford University, and then he was the student of a professor of Brazilian history, whose name was John Worth. He was my brother. And so I grew up knowing about Brazilian history, and we looked at each other when I came in. I said, I know you, right? Anyway, you know, it's very important, and the role that Brazil plays in all of this is absolutely critical. We have to understand that right from the beginning, from the time of the Earth Summit in 1992 to today, where the leadership of Brazil, Brazil's industry, Brazil's finance people is so important. We had a remarkable dinner last night with a number of Brazilian business leaders who told us, I mean, it was like they are the most enlightened group of people that I have met with, I think, ever. And it made me think about, I wish that we had more people like that in the United States, because we have some very real political problems in the United States dealing with climate change. If you think the title of our program today is Energy and Climate, energy is climate. Climate is energy. They are the same thing. That's 90% of the problem. It's the most interesting issue there is. It's the most complicated. It touches everything that all of us will ever deal with all of our lives long. It is fascinating, and the more you know about it, the more interesting it gets. So you wonder, why are so many of these dunderheads in the United States, dunderheads is a way of saying people who don't think, people in the United States Congress who are saying this isn't real. They're still saying it's not real. So we have a real problem, and these people, the dunderheads, are also very, very well funded. There are enormous pools of money, most of it oil company money, which is bent upon making sure that the American public is not well informed, making sure that the climate scientists are harassed, making sure that the truth does not come out. It's a terrible political situation. However, in the last 2 years, President Obama has really grabbed this issue in a very positive way. And a number of things have happened in the United States, Matthew, and I'll close with this. A number of things have happened in the United States that are exceedingly important. One, related to automobiles and auto efficiency. The standards of efficiency for automobiles have gone up to 55 miles a gallon, which is very high, very, very important. That's about 25% of the carbon going into the atmosphere comes from mobile sources. And if that happens in the United States, it's going to happen all over the world, and it is happening. That's a huge commitment, and it was a big battle with the auto companies, a big battle with the oil companies, but the President committed himself to doing that. Second, popular support for climate has grown significantly, and you all probably saw pictures of the huge march in New York down 6th Avenue of hundreds of thousands of people. It was a very, very moving experience. There were people from all across the country, every age, every color, every type, every whatever it was, people were there protesting the fact that there wasn't action. The third thing that happened was a very significant meeting between President Obama and President Xi of China. The two of them got together in the late fall, and when the two biggest polluters get together, with all the differences they've had, and come to that kind of conclusion, that means big momentum. That is very important. And then the other major thing that's happened is Pope Francis. Pope Francis has been an extraordinary leader, and he has put himself and his leadership. He's going to come out with a major encyclical later this year. He's going to be at the UN negotiations. He's going to be at Paris. He's sending this information out to 1.5 billion Catholics all across the world. It's very, very important. So, Matthew, the summary of what's happening is, in my view, momentum. We finally have momentum. You know, we have the automobiles. We have the massive public push. We have the agreement with China. We have the Pope coming out. These are all really positive things. So anybody who gets depressed about this, and you can get depressed because it's such a big problem, you can say, well, we've got some really good progress, and that could make us all feel much better about the prospects for the future.
Well, thank you very much. That's very encouraging to hear. I'd like to jump to Tasso now, since we're on this encouraging note. And today, Tasso wrote a column in the Planeta Sustentável, the website where I work, about the new innovations coming out of Tesla and what they mean for energy and climate. And I wonder, Tasso, if you would be willing to speak to that. What do you see the significance of that announcement by Elon Musk? I think it was yesterday or the day before.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what is happened with Tesla. It's a sign of what is happening with energy in general. Energy is very yeah, the energy is abundant. It's everywhere. So it's not, we don't have a lack of energy. The question is to have the right type of energy with low emissions in the right place and when the people need it. And that's the problem we have now. So one of the best ways to deliver that is to do it by electricity and to do it using solar. Because the sun is everywhere. All the other types of energy, you have to find the best place to get it, etc. But sun, it's everywhere. Everywhere in the planet, you have sun. So there is, what is driving this revolution for the next years on energy is, first, we have a process of electrification. Today, about 20% of the energy that we consume in the world is electricity. And it has to go above 50% on the coming decades. If you want to have, because electricity is the best way to get renewable energy and clean energy. The second thing is we have to leapfrog the process of delivering energy to the people that don't have energy in a way that they don't have to pass through the fossil fuels to get to an abundant source of energy at the right time.
Who is that we have that has to leapfrog? The developing countries?
Yeah, I mean, we have to do this process to get to the 2 billion people that still didn't born that we have in 2050, plus the 1 billion people that don't have access to energy today. So the same way that we didn't have to have landline telephones in many places in Africa to actually get the mobile phone, the same thing should happen with renewable energy. Just build infrastructure for those people, which means development, which access to better quality of life, but doing directly with the clean source of energy. And the third movement is this process of making innovation in this area open. And that I think is the most significant part of the story when Elon Musk present this Powerwall, this new battery scheme. I mean, we can talk a lot about how this technology will transform the way we see solar energy, because it basically allows us to have solar energy every single hour in the day, the night, and etc. But the big thing is he's putting out all the technology, all the patents, free and open. So it means that anyone could replicate that, build that on other places, and multiply in scale. And I think this is the type of science that we need right now if you want to go fast enough to guarantee that we will not transpass the 1,000 gigatons of CO2 emissions until the end of this century.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to turn the discussion a little bit back towards us here in Brazil and talk to Mr. José Penido here. And see, we've seen from our three first panelists a very encouraging picture of where we're at right now. Is Brazil following along? How is Brazil doing in this area?
Yes, I believe that Brazil is also becoming more ambitious in terms of its contribution for climate change. I'd like to focus mainly on the forest issue, because Brazil is one of the most relevant countries in the world in terms of forests. And you know that it's impossible to manage the climate challenge without really solving the question of forests. Because the total content of carbon nowadays sequestrated on the existing forests is higher than the total emission of fossil fuels and land change use from the humanity since the pre-industrialization area. So just to put the volume of carbon on the forest in the right perspective. And you know that Brazil has been, without any reasonable justification, burning our forests at very unacceptable level. Brazil, at the peak, burned about 27,000 square kilometers a year. So it was a disaster. Huh? Now, fortunately, it came down to something between 4,000 and 5,000 square kilometers. Is still a very high number. We should fight for that. And fortunately, Brazil has issued a new forest code recently. And we are now trying to push this law to be enforced and to oblige all the landowners to comply with this new forest code. Just to give you an example how important this is. The areas of rehabilitation of forests just to protect the water flows, it's estimated to be at the range of 21 million hectares. 21 million hectares just to rebuild the forest that protects the water flows. If you add about $3,000 per hectare of restoration costs, we are talking about something about $60 billion to be invested in this area. We also need to invest in forest to produce the water. You see the great São Paulo area is now starving for water. Huh? And this is because we simply burn our forests. So population are now making the connection between the blue of water and the green of forests. And in order to do this, we should also promote restoration. So I think I'm very optimistic that we are now able to convince the population, the public opinion, that it's time to really be very incisive in changing the results of how Brazil is managing our asset, forestal asset. And I hope that we really have now the law to enforce this and to enforce for a big change in this point.
Thank you very much. Beatriz, I'd like to ask you about Brazilian industry. And how is Brazilian industry reacting to the climate challenge? And what kinds of things are they concerned about, and are they rising to the challenge?
Okay. What we sense is that Brazilian companies are really changing their mindset, so they are even more worried with climate change and acting. That means doing their carbon GHG emissions, their inventories, starting to think about how to measure their carbon footprints of products. And this is interesting because it's not only an interest of these companies, but also a demand that comes from Europe or United States, for example, that are starting to demand this kind of information from companies. So the companies that already have this kind of information and put it to public, they are very well seen by investors and by clients and all their suppliers that work with these companies, and they have a differential, a competitiveness differential regarding other companies. So it's interesting, especially the companies that export commodities. They will have to deal with this and start measure this kind of data and give this information so they can be in competitiveness with other companies.
Thank you very much. Haroldo, could you speak to the question of the Brazilian government, and what is the government position, and how do you think that that will evolve for Paris?
Okay. Well, as you know, the Brazilian government has been a very quite active negotiating player during the whole intergovernmental process dealing with climate change. We need to remind the first Brazilian proposal back to 1997, which actually evolved to the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, but also was the first attempt to really set up in concrete terms the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Brazil has been recognized as a bridge between developing and developed countries, always trying to conciliate different interests. Of course, it's a strong voice in the South, and I believe that the change, the shift into the profile of emissions in Brazil has also allowed a more modern and pragmatic position by the Brazilian delegation in proposing different alternatives to conciliate different interests. And in the past years, Brazil has been a very strong voice in terms of that we need a more ambitious and climate change regime for all the countries. But Brazil has also accepted its own responsibility in terms of emitting greenhouse gas emissions. And the decrease of deforestation has been a significant step by not only the Brazilian government, but the whole Brazilian society in terms of combating climate change.
Thank you. Dr. Brundtland, could you tell us what your expectations are for Paris? Are you hopeful?
Yes, I mean, I'm now sure that there will be a deal in Paris. However, now the question is, how good the deal is going to be, we don't know yet. But we still have time. I mean, this is only May, and several actors have a possibility to stretch further. And I'm not talking only about governments, but also about businesses, civil society, and many of the other actors who are looking at and being part of that gathering in Paris. Now, the fact that many countries have sent in their own national plans and commitments to the Secretariat of the negotiations shows that everyone across the world are now aware that all governments have to be responsive and have to be following up, preferably at the right time, which not everyone has done. The right time was the 31st of March to send in their national plans. Not all countries have done so, but as Tim said earlier, because China and the US gave those announcements in November, all those countries who were trying to stay back and pointing fingers at US or China or both, they had taken away a method of avoiding committing themselves. Because now nobody can say, since the two biggest emitters are not committing themselves and not doing, making plans and committing to the international community, then why should we? Many countries were hiding behind the US and China. That possibility has been taken away, which is very important. So this gives me, increasing optimism that we at least will have countries all having sent in their plans, and that although those plans, I'm sure, will not reach to what we need, because we know about the level of what it looks like, it will not be sufficient to avoid more than 2-degree increase in global temperature by 2050, which is what everyone has signed up to in Copenhagen. All countries, they did one important thing in Copenhagen. Remember the pessimistic, the terrible fall of everyone's aspirations in Copenhagen 2009. But one thing happened, and many should be honored for having been part of that happening. They did decide that the world should not have more than 2-degree Celsius increase by 2050. That is a commitment that everyone is responsible to try to help achieve. So, but of course, any deal which covers everyone in Paris will be a great step forward. It then, I'm sure, has to be improved. It has to be improved from now, what it looks now, until December. More can be done to make that agreement a forward-looking first step for something that we need to take care of our global future.
Thank you. Senator Wirth, do you think President Obama will go to Paris?
I have no idea, but
it was a try.
He hasn't asked me. If he were to ask me, I'd say definitely you ought to go. But what's important is that he has become a major advocate, and he deals with this day in and day out. It's extremely important. It is a big change. Many of us who were strong Obama supporters were very disappointed in the first 4 years of his first term, where he was, they tried to do certain things and they couldn't do them, and they learned on the job. The last 2 years has been very exciting, and I think the next 2 years will be too. So I wouldn't be surprised that he shows up in Paris to kind of put a real signature on this, because this has been one of his political legacies. Now, going to follow up on what Dr. Brundtland said about Paris is very interesting for those of you who are students of politics and perceptions. The original thought about this climate issue was that there was going to be a set of 2 or 3 or 4 solutions from the top, everybody would agree to a formulation of reductions, everybody would agree to a price issue, everybody would agree to the way in which countries got together. The so-called, that was the top-down silver bullet theory, that there was a silver bullet, a single way to solve the problem. And the world struggled with that for 20 years almost, right to Copenhagen. Copenhagen was the big conferences, you know, they were Rio, Kyoto, Copenhagen, and now Paris. They struggled with that until Copenhagen, at which point governments finally understood that there was not going to be a single formulation or two formulations. There would be 193 formulations. This was not going to be top-down. This was going to be bottoms-up, which in a very interesting way is where the world is headed today. The world is becoming much more decentralized with the internet, you know, with communications, and everybody knows what's going on. The world has become a more informal, more bottoms-up institution, and governments are partners not telling everybody what to do. So what's going to happen in Paris, as Dr. Brundtland said, is every country will make its commitment as it can make its commitment. For example, people will look at Brazil and say, we were talking about the forests, are going to say, what is Brazil doing about forests? That's going to be the most, probably the most important thing that Brazil will do at Paris is to talk about forests. Well, if you're in Sudan, forests don't mean a lot to you. You know, you're going to be worried about groundwater. So Sudan might have a commitment that relates to groundwater. We in the United States will probably have commitments that relate to technology, and we have had more than anything else. So the key is how do we add up all of these commitments to get where we have to go? Will it get us all that way? Not yet. And we won't get where we have to go. But what I think is the most important thing to keep in mind is, again, what I said before, momentum. We're headed in the right direction. All countries get together. Everybody has to make a commitment. People are going to be judged. You know, I'm going to look at Beatrice's thing, say, what are you doing? You know, and they're going to be looking at me, what are you doing? Nations are looking at each other. What is everybody doing? So you get, again, a kind of bottoms-up political pressure, too, which is very, very important. So that's it's going to be, I think, going to be very, very interesting. You know, what Obama does is in many ways important, but he's already done that. It's more important what kind of pressure from the bottom comes up. That's what's going to be important, and that's what's exciting, and that's what will be possibly give us the real hope and real possibilities.
Tasso, would you talk about your expectations for Paris, too?
Yeah. First, I think in terms of the environment that we have right now, there are some other two things to add. I think not just Obama, you know, joined with, you know, the government of China could push for something new, but he also did the same with India, which is even more crucial because India is the one that is speeding up a lot the emissions, and India is where we can have the chance to do the leapfrog in large scale because there is too many people without energy in India. It's a little bit different from China. So I think this is crucial. It changed completely the mood of the debate when it involves the guys from India in the negotiations, in the talks, and the way they express the commitment of Modi with the subject. It's clear when he's talking about that. So it's opened a new window. So I think it's
so India, you think is is on board as well?
I think India is now changing to be on board because it has a leadership that is pushing for that. So it's not at the same level. Yeah, yeah. It's not the same level, but
he just got back from India, I should tell you.
Yeah. So yeah. So I think that what we have is a new movement. The third one, the second thing is one of the important things to happen on the coming years is that we achieve the peak of emissions globally somewhere close to 2020, and that was something. I mean, until 2-3 years ago, was something like completely impossible to think about. And it's very likely that this year, last year actually, we got close to the peak. It's possible that we were, especially in the energy sector, that we were close to the peak, depending on how the things will go in India in the future. But it's there. It's a revolution happening. I mean, China growth 7% on economy and 0 on the emissions. That's really amazing. No? So I think that's the second movement important that's happening and create a new environment for what we have in Paris. What I think we should get in Paris, I don't think we will get an agreement that will have the ambition in terms of what the countries are putting on the table right now to be even closer to 2 degrees now. But if we agree on an architecture, on a structure of this agreement that says we have cycles of revision of what we are putting as pledge, and those cycles will allow us to revise where we are going, and it's very clear where we want to go in 2050, then we have a chance. So what it means to be very clear where we want to go in 2050 is not just the 2 degrees, because 2 degrees is something which is kind of just measuring the temperature. What we control is how much we emit on greenhouse gases. So what we should have is a very clear goal on where we want to head in the emissions, which I think should be something in the lines of, zero emissions, net zero emissions as an ambition, as a big ambition for 2050. If we get there, and then we have the right cycles of revisions, it's better to have shorter revision periods, so we can do it every 5 years or every 10 years, revise the pledge. Then we can get close to the 2 degrees goal. And I'm optimistic that this is still possible to achieve in Paris.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Penido, you mentioned, and one of the things that I know is in the agricultural and the forestry sector in Brazil, it's responsible for a significant amount of emissions here, and there's enormous room for improvement. And you mentioned the figure of $60 billion that would need to be invested in order to
comply with the law.
Comply with the law, with the forest code. Are we going to find that money? Where are we going to find that money?
Yes, for my surprise, I'm a leading member of the WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where we have a group of 25 forest-based companies, not only those growing trees, but from the full value chain. So you have companies like Fibria and companies like Unilever that are on the very low end of the value chain. When we talk about availability of funds, it's clear that there is a promise to make available per year $100 billion just for RED Plus. The problem is that the RED Plus mechanism is absolutely bureaucratic, difficult to implement. Just to give one example, Brazil got a grant from Norway of $1 billion for the Fundo Amazonia, the Amazonia Fund. After 3 years, no more than $200 million have been passed for to finance the land users. So it's clear that I hope that in Paris we'll be able to, and here we are talking about one event sponsored by United Nations. So I think that the multilateral mechanisms like CDM, like RED Plus, should be revised to simplify. We now have, let's say, modern mechanisms and methodology to satellite control, to monitor each piece of land, so we can speed up this, reduce the cost of implementation, and for the first time implement, for instance, the global payment for ecosystem service. Forest provides a huge number of ecosystem service, and we should find a way, a simple way, to pay for results. So this is one point, and I think that money is available. One project like that will no cost more than $20 billion a year.
Okay.
So I am optimistic. And the other point that I'd like to mention, my expectation about Paris, that includes Brazil, because you asked me the Brazilian situation, is the incredible difference between subsidies and incentives being provided globally for the fossil fuel industry, including oil and coal, at the range from 600 to $700 billion a year, when all the other incentives and subsidies to renewables is 1/10 of this. It's about 60 to $70 billion. So I think that we should change this globally. And here in Brazil is the same. On the last decade, we had been just discussing about how to develop the big reserves of the pre-salt reserves. And we are not promoting all the potentiality of renewables in Brazil. Biomass, solar, wind, we have many options, but we are trying to emit more. So I think that this is something that Brazil has to address, and globally speaking, we should also address, reduce dramatically the subsidies to the fossil industry, and to give priority to the renewables.
Thank you very much. Beatriz, could you comment on that? Do you think that Brazilian companies are prepared to take advantage of a fossil-free world? I mean, we seem to have been moving a little bit backwards in the last decade here. We seem to have been returning to fossil fuels rather than getting away from them in Brazil. Does that make sense, what I'm saying, or could you comment on that?
Yeah, it's what Penido also mentioned is that Brazil was always known to have one of the cleanest energy matrix for many, many years. And this has been changing in the last years. And we have, for example, investing more and more in fossil fuel-based energy sources instead of investing in other alternative sources like solar and wind power, since we also have the water crisis in Brazil, which will affect directly the source of energy that we are most dependent of. So this is one thing that not only companies, but the whole country is worried about. And maybe we are starting to act a little bit too late here in Brazil and making big investments in renewables. But also what is interesting, and also regarding to Paris, is this preparation for the conference, and how we see that not only companies, that sectors are organizing themselves and working together with the government to do a proposal that is feasible and that makes sense, which each one has its part in a proposal or a commitment that the country will have. So if we have all different actors together working, and not only the government setting the goals for the next years, then maybe we'll have a chance to change this. And I think we still have chance to have an agreement in Paris, and then hopefully we can get step by step, we can get there.
Okay. I'm getting pressure for time. Haroldo, I'm going to give you one last question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, okay? Haroldo, I'd just like to ask quickly, do you think that the Brazilian government will have the same protagonism that it's had in the past in Paris? Is it interested in Paris?
Yeah. But, yes, but if you allow me, I would like to put in a bigger picture, because I believe that this year is really a milestone, because we have actually three main processes that we cannot forget. Actually, there has been a lot of confusion and misunderstanding on how climate change fits into the post-2015 development agenda as a whole. And actually, for this big framework, international community has three main challenges this year to deliver a substantial outcome in three negotiating processes. And the first one will be in July, a very important conference that will be held in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, the third conference, international conference on finance for development. It will deal with means of implementation. And when I talk about means of implementation, I'm talking about trade, technology transfer, data, and also financial resources. The second main challenge will be the summit for the new development agenda in September in New York, when we expect that the set of sustainable development goals will be agreed upon. And the third one is the conference in Paris. but I see as three pieces of a big puzzle, and we need to remind the recognition of that. Three processes that are three legs of the same big picture and strongly interdependent. The SDGs represent a joint vision for humanity in 2030. But this vision can only be realized if we ensure the means of implementation and the financial resources for this vision. And of course, that countries commit themselves about the ways of combating climate change. Because of course, this is fundamental. So it's the whole picture that we need to envisage.
Thank you. Okay, can I get questions from the audience? We have 10 minutes. Or questions from Twitter? Yes, please, go ahead. You first, and then we'll go to Twitter. Yes, please.
Well, I am really happy to see all this vision.
Oui.
But considering my name is Dalberto Adulis. I'm a professor and consultant on sustainability. I am quite happy to see this optimism regarding the path to Paris, including the issue of the target that we can maybe reach in terms of emissions. But if you look at the oil fuels price, the 10 cents, areias bituminosas.
Tar sands.
Yes.
Tar sands.
Yes, this kind of stuff. And U.S. also cheaper ways to use.
Shale gas.
Yes, this gas. It's not the opposite that you are seeing. I mean, most part of countries, maybe like Brazil, will go use and adopt this easy way to get cheap and dirty energy. That should be my question and for some comments.
Who would like to answer that? Okay, Senator, please.
Well, there's cheap energy and non-cheap energy. The U.S. has suddenly found itself with a remarkable supply of oil and gas coming from fracking, coming from a new technology for recovering oil and gas. And that has been a great boon and a real problem. It's been a real positive thing because the coal industry says that there's a war on coal. Well, actually, there is a war on coal, and natural gas is winning because natural gas is forcing out a lot of coal, and that's a good thing because natural gas is half as dirty as coal. So if you look at a pattern of less carbon emissions for energy produced, that's a good thing. The bad thing is the big energy companies are still pouring a huge amount of money into places like shale oil, which is in Canada, tar sands, very dirty, very expensive. And many of us would say, why are we spending more money to find even greater supplies of fossil fuels, which we can never use, if we believe that we're going to hold the world at a 2-degree temperature increase? We can never use all of these fuels. So on the one hand, shale gas is a good thing for now, for a transition, because it helps us to get rid of coal. And that's a good thing on the way to less carbon emissions. A bad thing is doing the tar sands, which are foul and encourage the oil companies to go after deep sea drilling, go to the Arctic, do a lot of really dumb things, and spend a huge amount of money, which are much better spent in lots of alternative energy sources. So it's like all things in energy, there's an sort of a one hand and on the other. And that's again what makes it so extremely interesting, is that sort of parsing it, cutting up the issue is very hard to do. A lot of public politics about it, a lot of cheap discussion about it, a lot of sort of answers that are very superficial. So the more you know, the more complicated and the more interesting it is.
Thank you, Senator. Marielle, do we have a question from, 3 questions? Okay, can you Maybe Rodrigo, you can get those.
What should we look for and expect out of C for all? SE for all.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
SE
You
for
got that? You? Go ahead.
One of the great challenges of energy is to provide energy to the 1.5 billion people in the world who have no modern energy services. So you say to yourself, well, we have to provide energy to almost 2 billion people that have no energy. But how can we do that at the same time we're trying to limit carbon emissions? I mean, this is a very significant challenge. So the formulation, it's what's called C for all, sustainable energy for all. The idea is to provide energy services, and these are not incredibly expensive grid-based coal-fired power plants, but say solar energy, home energy, wind energy, localized energy for everybody. That's extremely important. And the people who don't have that energy are not the people who are providing the biggest problems. The big problems are the US and China and India and so on. So while you're providing energy to the poorest people and giving them a chance, you also have to make the transition, and that transition is to clean energy, to solar and to wind, and to energy efficiency. We use energy very, very inefficiently in Brazil and in the United States in particular. India is terrible. You know, we're not good at using energy efficiently. So again, we have to do two things: provide energy to the poorest people so they get access to energy, and at the same time make the transition so that we're doing more renewable energy and more efficiency. That is C for all, sustainable energy for all. That's the formulation.
Thank you, Senator. Marielle, do you have more questions?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
If the coppers does not work, what's the next options we have for?
If we don't reach an agreement in Paris, what's the plan B? I think that's, if you will allow me to.
There is no plan B. No. No plan B. The countries are all addressing the issues towards Paris, and they know that there has to be an agreement in Paris. There will be. We don't need to think about a plan B.
Okay, thank you. I've got one more question here, and then we'll call it quits.
So, hi, my name is Camila. I'm a student here in INSPE. And my question is related to what's happening here in Brazil, because we know that we have a lot of potential in other energies. And as you said before, we're kind of going backwards in investing more and more in fossil energy. And now we just had that problem with Petrobras. So I want to know from people here in the industry and for people outside of Brazil, how do you think that this will outcome? How do you think that this will affect the matrix of energy here in Brazil and the investments?
May I start to answer? I have the same doubts as you. Let's say Brazil is drilling a lot, spending a huge amount of capital. You know that Brazil is short of capital for many other issues like social standard of living. And we are now exploring oil from deep sea that possibly we will never use, because the transition for clean energy, or the transition to when we reach the limit for climate increase, we will be obliged to leave this where it is. And one of the most relevant outcomes, in my opinion, that we expect from Paris is the declaration of the carbon price. As a businessman, I think that the only real compelling movement for companies to incorporate the price of carbon is when the World Bank or United Nations declare a price of carbon. Immediately, our companies will have to put these in their internal calculations, liabilities and everything. So as Brazilian, I would like to see Petrobras revising its strategy for the medium-long term, because Brazil is not doing a clever decision, is investing a huge amount to explore deep sea reserves.
Okay.
Who sets the policy for Petrobras?
This is the problem, because the governance of Petrobras has been fully directed from the federal government.
And who's that?
It's the president. Huh?
And what's the president say about climate change?
So far, nothing.
I'm going to ask Tasso to sum up, and we're going to have to end it here. Okay, Tasso?
President Dilma is going to U.S. to meet President Obama in June 30th.
June 30th, yes.
And it's in the top of the agenda, as we heard, is energy and climate change. So we have an opportunity to see whether we can be more proactive than we have been on the last 4 years. But I think just to give a sense of what's really happening in Brazil is we, in the mid of 90s, the amount of renewable energy we have in our total matrix, considering everything, the fuels for cars and electricity, etc., was about 55%. Now it's coming down.
Renewables, including hydro.
Yeah. Okay, so now we are going down below 40. That's the threshold that we have right now. So at 39. So 39 is small, big. What is that? It's very good. 39 is very good comparing to what we have in the average road. No doubt. That's very good. The question is, what's the trend? So the trend of the world is actually increase the renewables, and our trend is going down. Not because we don't have more resource to explore, etc. Simply because we are taking decisions now based on this new discovery of oil and so on. So if there is one thing good from the crisis on Petrobras, is that this may make us to slow down what we're doing in Petrobras and then have a chance to turn the pathway on the next years. Because if we were to invest $700 billion that are planned for the next until 2022 on oil, then we'll not come back because the money is there. So you need to get the returns and so on. So we have a chance now to have more time to think and change the priorities.
Well, thank you. Actually, I've been authorized to accept 2 more questions, and I've already got that. I'm sorry, right here and right here. So we'll start with you, and please identify yourself.
My name is Priscila Claro. I am a faculty here in INSPER, and I do research on corporate sustainability. And we've been talking a lot about the source of energy, but I'm really also worried about the consumption of energy. And besides deforestation, we know that electricity companies in Brazil represents 10% of the total consumption. It's more than the households, all households together. And I'm really worried because this is a sector that is really, the legislation or the regulation is really rigid, and price is decided by the government. So they have to cut costs to have good performance. In that sense, it's quite difficult to innovate, because if you want to innovate and to have a matrix of different sources of energy and a good process, good operations, how do we deal with that? So electricity companies, they are suffering from that, and they were supposed to be the ones innovating. And I want to hear from you if you see a light in the end of this tunnel, because this is really a problem.
Well, you know, again, this is a question of policy. It sounds to me what you are describing illustrates that there is a need for revision of the policies of Brazil in these areas. Because it is not logical, given the goals and given the way the economy works. You know, this doesn't sound good. I don't know the details. I just hear there is need for policy change.
Okay, one more question here.
My name is Felipe. I'm a student here in ISPER, and well, Our biggest challenge is to provide energy to the poorest community. And I'd like to know in this picture, how important is social entrepreneurship? And how does it have to work to make a big difference and really create a sound in world community? I'd like to hear your opinion about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to have to let Tasso answer this because he's very enthusiastic.
Yeah, I just came back from the Skull World Forum on Social Entrepreneurship, which is just, yes. I mean, if you go there and just look at the sessions that are related to energy, and you'll be really amazed what is driving actually all the tremendous efforts that have been made in different places to really make the leapfrog that we were talking about a real case happening. So we can see this on the issues of battery. We see this on the issues of solar, wind, and so on. So, and there is tons of opportunities. I would say that there is probably the area where we have more like B-type companies starting up. It's on this field of energy. So it's definitely a key.
Well, one thing you got to mention, Tom. You have to mention the fact that social entrepreneurship, in large part, happens within a framework of rules and laws and regulations. And if the climate for change and the climate for enlightened energy policy isn't there, it's much harder to do. If you don't have predictability for what your energy prices are going to be, it's hard to do. If you're discouraging the production of ethanol, for example, from sugarcane, which is what's happening now in Brazil, as I understand, the ethanol market is going way down, which is crazy, you know, in terms of what I would think the country ought to be doing. It's very hard. Imagine all the entrepreneurs who want to be involved in the ethanol business and the changes that go on. If you don't have good forest policy, you know, it's extremely difficult to do the kind of social organization that's necessary, which is to say, going back to your question, you know, what kind of leadership do you have, and what does your leadership want to do, and what do you all demand of your leadership? You have to tell your leadership it doesn't happen by itself. This is a democracy. Leadership occurs, changes occur, policies change because you ask for them. You demand them. That's what's happening all across the world. That's why it was so exciting, you know, that we were seeing that march down 6th Avenue. Hundreds of thousands of people saying, we want change. It doesn't happen unless you say you want change.
Well, thank you very much. This was a very encouraging session, and it was an honor and a pleasure to get to be a part of it. Oh, and we're all going downstairs to a party, right? Was that the right thing to say? They want the panelists to leave first, right? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Vocês podem. Can you guys come downstairs? Vamos lá embaixo. Thank you. Thank you.